What is up, Janksters? It's your boy Graham, also known as HamHogs42 on the internet, and today I want to talk about a card that I fully anticipate is going to see a ton of Commander play from now until the rest of ever, because it is an incredibly powerful hoser that hoses on maybe more than you think, and that card is Stone of Erech. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that correctly. Whenever I read that, I'm like, is it Erech? Or is it just Erech? Like, hey, Eric, you left your stones in the yard, dude. What the heck, man? What are you doing? Anyway, so, Eric, this one's for you. So, Stone of Erech, it's a legendary artifact for 1. If a creature an opponent controls would die, exile it instead. You can pay 2, tap it, sacrifice Stone of Erech, exile target player's graveyard, draw a card. This is the latest installment in a long line of generic artifacts that hate on graveyards, but this one does it in kind of a unique way. Cards like Soul Guide Lantern before it, or actually there are a couple of other lanterns. I think Lantern of the Lost. I don't know why they were lantern themed for a minute there, but actually there's a Jack-o'-lantern in Midnight Hunt now that I think about it. Regardless, it's not uncommon for there to be like an uncommon in the set that is just a colorless artifact that when it enters, it exiles a graveyard or a card from a graveyard, and then you can sacrifice it to hate on a graveyard or draw a card. In the case of Soul Guide Lantern, you get to either draw a card or exile a graveyard. In the case of Stone of Erech, you get both. You just sack it and then exile a graveyard and draw a card, which is fantastic. But it costs you 2 to activate. So that's a meaningful cost. It is. The part that kind of blows my mind about this, though, is upon entering, it doesn't hate on the graveyard at all directly. Instead, it goes an indirect route by forcing creatures that opponents control to go into exile instead of dying. So that is incredibly powerful because aristocrat style strategies or reanimator strategies, of which there's often some crossover. A lot of the times reanimator decks will leverage sacrifice effects to get their creatures back into their graveyard, especially ones with like really nice ETBs. If you haven't had the opportunity to rock an Ashen Rider in Commander with like sacrifice and reanimation loops, oh baby, I highly recommend it. It's great. Your opponents will hate you for it. But Stone of Erech completely shuts that down, because when that creature dies, if you sacrifice one of your creatures and your opponent has a Stone of Erech down, it's just gone. Like, the creature exiles. And on top of that, it doesn't touch the graveyard at any point because this is a replacement effect. The reason that's meaningful is within the Magic rules. If a creature says, when this creature dies, do X, dies is defined as the creature going to the graveyard. And in the case of tokens, you may think, but wait, tokens don't stay in the graveyard, but they do go to the graveyard. Tokens actually do touch the graveyard before they cease to exist, and that's why tokens can have token creatures can have death triggers. But in the case of Stone of Erech, though, if it's down, you, the owner of, or the controller of Stone of Erech, do get all your death triggers if you have any. Like, those are still live and online, and your creatures go to the graveyard and sit there so you can reanimate them later. But for all your opponents, none of their death triggers count anymore, and the graveyard is weakened. It is still there. Anything that they mill or discard into their graveyard stays put, unlike cards like Leyline of the Void. And unlike cards like Grafdigger's Cage, there's nothing stopping you from reanimating a card that has already found its way into your graveyard if your opponent has a Stone of Erech online. So that's, I mean, you can play around it in some cool ways, but this is going to hate on a lot of decks. Like, if you right now are a Commander player who has a deck where a way you can win a game, maybe it's not the primary way, but a solid way you can win a game is off of Sir Konrad triggers, I have terrible news for you, because Stone of Erech is not going to allow those death triggers to ping your opponents the way you want them to. I know one of my go-to Commander decks, it actually loops Living Death or Rise of the Dark Realms and Eternal Witness to just create a death loop where Sir Konrad triggers kills the whole board. That's the idea. If Stone of Erech's down, that strategy doesn't work, like, at all. Like, the moment I sacrifice my board to something like a Living Death, all the creatures that were on it are now exiled. They're gone. I can't loop them back. And they didn't ping anybody on the way out. It's pretty rough. Yeah, it hurts a lot. So this card, it is a very, very powerful hoser in a very subtle way. I think it's also going to be easy for people to forget about this. It's one of those cards that somebody could play on turn 1, and you might have a moment of like, oh, that's gonna suck. But then by turn 5 or 6, it's very easy to forget that this is here. So keep an eye out for it. Like, make a note. Also, just as a general etiquette rule, if you are the player getting hosed by this, be aware of it and like honor it. That's the other thing. If you are in a commander game and your opponent has a hoser down, if you like sacrifice one of your creatures and go to put it in your graveyard, perhaps like as an accident, even if the other person doesn't check you on it, if you catch it, honor it. Because the truth of the matter is, letting that creature stay in the graveyard, even if the opponent doesn't check you on this effect, that is still going against the rules. Like, it doesn't work like that. You should, if you identify it, if you, like, honor it. Like, we're all here to play a casual game. We're here to have fun and honor the rules of the game. That said, everybody out there, start packing answers to this if you're not already, because there are already cards out there like Grafdigger's Cage, like Soul Guide Lantern, that can already hate on your graveyards. That's already a thing. It is already very, very powerful. This is just the latest installment, and it gets around it in a way that we don't see as often. So this isn't anything new. Wizards is not adding fresh hate into the game. So have cards that can answer this. And honestly, even as a 1-drop, even as a colorless 1-drop, if you have to spend an Utter End or a Vindicate to get rid of this, just do it. Like, it's still worth it to you. You know, even if you're spending 4 mana on a piece of removal that says destroy target non-land permanent, usually that wouldn't be worth it on a 1-drop. But to get this off the field, depending on your strategy, it might be. That's how good this thing is. It's excellent, frankly. So yeah, I think it's a really good piece of, it's a good hoser. Also though, graveyard players everywhere, if I may say, if your opponent throws this down, don't throw a hissy fit about it. That's another commander, I guess this is gonna turn into a commander etiquette episode, and I'm okay with that. If somebody's playing a hoser that is generically available and it shuts down your strategy, they have not locked you out of playing the game. They have presented an obstacle that you need to overcome. That is all. So find ways within the rules to answer it. And once you have done that, then execute your game plan. If your deck, if you have 99 cards to work with, I know there are lands and whatnot, but you have, well, and you have like Soul Ring Command Tower. Okay, so you have 97 cards to work with. Okay. But there are plenty of ways to destroy artifacts and enchantments, or like I mentioned, non-land permanents. A lot of cards have access to those kinds of effects. You know, like there's a reason Beast Within and Chaos Warp are so incredibly popular, because they can hit like just generic stuff in a way that, well, in the case of Chaos Warp, like red shouldn't be able to do that, but it can because that one card exists. But anyway, there are answers to this. There are ways to deal with it. As the player who's getting hosed by the hoser, find a way to answer it. And if you don't have a card that can answer it in your deck, revamp your deck so that you have it in the future. Because that's not the fault of the person who played this. Like, that's your fault. Like, anyway, I firmly believe in having generically strong answers in your deck. Run board wipes, run artifact and enchantment removal, or cards that are capable of removing artifacts and enchantments. Run planeswalker removal. There's a card called Fracture that freaking nobody plays and is quietly fantastic. Like, they're out there. Find them, put them in your decks. They're good. Don't be afraid of stuff like this. Be stronger than this. It's just a rock. It's just a rock. You got this, dog. Graveyard players everywhere. Don't be afraid of this card. You can take it down. I guarantee it. Anyway, thank you so much for checking out this episode of the Overthinking MTG podcast. I appreciate it very, very much. If you enjoyed this, please like and subscribe if you're on the YouTubes. If you're listening in audio, you also rock. Thank you so much. And by the way, this is available on both YouTube as well as anywhere podcasts are available under the name Overthinking MTG. Thanks so much, and I'll catch you on the next one.